BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Gemma Kearney, and you're listening to Don't You Forget About Me from BBC Radio 4. Incredible music documentaries that you'll want to hear again. One of my favourite pastimes is to listen to illuminating music documentaries, and you are in for a treat. Dig into these archives, enjoy a plethora of sounds, and have your mind blown by the archive of the best music documentaries from MIA, Jeff Buckley to Aphex Twin. You've got it right here.
That's Blue Monday by New Order, one of the most famous 12 inches of all time. And I've come to the Factory Club in Manchester, a descendant of the famous Hacienda Club, 30 years old this year. I'm here to talk to Peter Hook of New Order and Peter Saville, who designed the notorious sleeve for the 12-inch Blue Monday. And where better to hear Blue Monday than actually in a club? When you were writing the piece, were you writing it as a 12-inch single, or were you working on it as a long piece of music?
You could get the sequences to play for ages. Whilst you were doing something else. Now, a musician, you wouldn't treat like that, because if you said to a musician, could you just play that over and over again while I go make a cup of tea? He wouldn't do it. But the sequences enabled you to look at music, to look into the hypnotic fact that you could play this thing over and over and over again. And the great thing about the analog synthesizers and the analog sequences that we were using was that every time it played, the equipment made it slightly different. It was never the same. It was like organically developed. The synth would change sound slightly and then come back. The timing would change slightly and then come back. So you were able to dwell, shall we say, on it, where you wouldn't dwell on a normal person playing. If I'm going to blow my own trumpet, it's the start of dance music.
Up until the early 80s, and particularly Blue Monday, there were very defined camps within pop culture that you had to sign up allegiance to. It was either rock music or it was dance music. And Blue Monday is this obvious kind of convergent point where progressive rock music and dance music recognise a kind of mutual existence and then begin to make that possible for their audience as well. In that sense, it's really important.
And it is interesting because, in a sense, the length of the track, 7.5 minutes, that's a prog rock length, but it also became the perfect length for a great disco track because of the way it fitted onto a 12-inch and got the right level of volume and dynamics.
It's quite strange when you put it like that. I suppose everything has to come from somewhere, doesn't it? You're no different to a prog rock track apart from the content and the music, are you?
And the context, because this sleeve, that also signals so much.
Pete's genius was putting the two together, wasn't it? Because it's about the future and the way that you store and listen to information.
Yeah. Is the sleeve a key part of Blue Monday?
I think it's a perfect accompaniment. I mean, the thing is that when Pete came to the practice place,
I came to the studio, which is a rare occurrence then.
Yeah, and we were loading up the emulator, which was quite a startling piece of equipment then. The emulator was a sampling keyboard, one of the first of its type, and we were playing samples back, mainly to do with bodily functions at first, but once that wore off, you were using it properly. And Pete was quite fascinated with the floppy disks that you were using to store the sounds.
I loved it, because I'd never seen a floppy. I'd heard of floppy disks, and I picked one up and Stephen said, that's a floppy disk. And I thought, that's what it is. The first time I heard Blue Monday was in the studio that day. I loved it, and I drove back listening to Blue Monday, and with this floppy disk on the seat beside me. By the time I got home, I knew that the cover would be a big kind of Klaus Oldenburg-style blow-up of a floppy disk. And as Hookie says, I think it's a perfect cover for this record. There's the equipment, the technology, and the track are one and the same. And this cover, in a way, is a kind of symbol of that. So as sleeves for records go, I think this is probably one of the best sleeves that I've ever done.
Well, I mean, it's a fantastic record, and it's a fantastic sleeve, without doubt. So the thing is that what a fantastic art project it was. And then the fact that it lost money makes it absolutely complete.
It does make it complete, yes.
But it did pave the way for you to have something accepted that's now the norm, isn't it? Kids understand 12-inch mixes, but they don't know what a 12-inch is, which is quite interesting. They understand the exploration of a song, the dubbiness, the openness, and the power that you get from featuring certain instruments. But a lot of them have never seen it. You know, I would understand the 12-inch.
Peter Hook, bass player with New Order, and Peter Saville, who designed the group's beautiful sleeves, which in many ways were as important as the music itself, and which in this case was so complicated and expensive, involving a special cut-out design, it meant the more copies the record sold, the more money it lost. New Order's now legendary Blue Monday 12-inch was released in 1983, and by then it was clear to music fans what a 12-inch single was. But it was only about 7 years before that this new format appeared, something that broke into the traditional monopoly of the 7-inch vinyl single and the 33 1/3 12-inch album. A disc was created that was neither the standard 3-minute 7-inch nor the 40-minute 10-track album. By editing and extending the most exciting rhythmic parts of a song and reducing the vocal storyline, the track could last for 6, 7, 8 relentless minutes. This was perfect for dance clubs where a brief lyric-packed 3-minute song seemed unsatisfying. Originally a promotional gimmick, almost a one-off novelty, for the sole purpose of DJs in cutting-edge discotheques, the 12-inch single rapidly broke out of the underground during the late 1970s. Public demand encouraged record companies to make them commercially available. Extended disco mixes began influencing pop music that wasn't necessarily disco. By 1980, an average pop single tended to be released not only in its familiar 7-inch form, but also as an oversized 12-inch containing tantalising, collectible alternative versions. Pop journalist and academic Lucy O'Brien remembers the changes in the general pop environment that occurred because of this fertile new format.
A lot of people say it's particularly well suited to dance singles and club singles. And I remember having Joyce Sims' All in All, which is for me a great club record. And there was this investigation of the beat that just went on and on after she'd stopped singing. It was all in the bass, and literally the space between those grooves, you had the wider grooves, and I loved the way you could just immerse yourself in that bass sound.
Move with me inside the strange world of the 12-inch. Let me take you on a tour of the 12-inch.
There were technical reasons why the 12-inch single sounded so dynamic. By putting less music onto a 12-inch vinyl record, opening the grooves wider, a track could sound louder and more forceful. A new set of sonic as well as structural possibilities were created.
To start cutting vinyl, we put the plate, which is what we actually cut to, and we put it onto this big metal turntable.
I've come to the famous Abbey Road studios in London's St John's Wood to meet cutting engineer Christian Wright as he cuts a 12-inch single.
So the way we cut to that plate is with a point. It's a metal point, it's ruby tipped. That tracks across the vinyl and it drops down and actually cuts the grooves. If you're looking at it side on, it's like a V-shaped trench.
Okay.
The bassier the moments, the deeper that trench is going to go. The more dynamic it is, then the more, that point's going to be pulled more left and right.
So we're going down the rapids in a way.
Yeah, you're creating waveforms. What you want now is to transfer it onto that vinyl at the best possible quality you can.
For historical harmony, we're cutting a version of one of disco's earliest hits, 1975's I'll Be Holding On, by one-time rockabilly singer Big Al Downing, which has entered history as one of the first tracks to be turned into a 45 RPM 12-inch.
The plate's down, I've set the lathe, we hit start, ready, we put the cutter head down and we hit fast. Now, the lathe is now tracking across, and it's now begun cutting. It's cutting the running groove, which is the bit that you first drop it onto. And it's cutting.
Okay.
And you can actually hear the sound coming off the point. You can actually hear that is the music being put through that point.
If I look in the microscope.
If you look in the microscope. The major pitfall of vinyl is the closer you get to the centre, the sound quality diminishes. You will hear a loss of high frequency, you'll hear some what we call inner groove distortion. The reason for that, in the physics sense, the closer you get to the centre, the less space, but you're still trying to cram in exactly the same information. It's something you can't get away from unless you cater the length of your track to these pitfalls, which is what I think the 12-inch at 45 did.
But it would create a new length, didn't it?
Yes, suddenly you could fit 7 or 8 minutes. You wouldn't go into the last 20% of it, so you wouldn't go into all those pitfalls, so you've got a better sonic recording. If you look to kind of early dance music, it is around that 7 to 8 minute mark. So we can see that this track is going to sound great in terms of, we're going to get a good level onto the vinyl. To talk about another pitfall of vinyl, the louder you cut the vinyl, the more space it begins to use up, because the deeper the groove has to be. It's also about the content. Let's take, for example, it's dance music, so we've got a pretty thumping kick drum. The artist wants it to get onto the record at a loud level because they want the DJ to drop it in a club and it to be not, drifting away. So you have all these things and it uses up more space. So you can see where these two, they start to conflict. So this is why when people were writing the music, to write that 7 or 8 minute mark, it meant they could get their music onto the vinyl at a good level without going right up to the centre. So they had this optimum way of putting the music to vinyl, and I guess that's a big part of that era. I think with all music, it comes with its problems with vinyl. It's not just a case of hit play, start the lathe, it will cut fine. You can have sibilance, you can have kind of brass can be really problematic, and these days some dubstep kind of with crazy wobbling oscillators is not what a lathe was expecting when it was invented years ago. It certainly pushes the lathe to its capabilities and beyond. Right, comes to the end of the track. You wait till the track ends, you bring the faders down, you click fast, and now it's scrolling through to the centre. So basically all the space we haven't used, it's now using that up, and it will pop up, and you've got a finished vinyl.
Record producer Tom Moulton noted how in sophisticated mid-70s nightclubs, committed dancers preferred dancing to continuous music without any distracting breaks. He began creating longer augmented versions of fashionable funk and soul tracks, heightening the drama, teasing the dancers with exaggerated build-ups of tension, stripping back extraneous musical decoration, and he accidentally invented the new profession of remixer. He then accidentally discovered how best to put these new remixes onto vinyl.
I would go to Media Sound every Friday to do mastering on singles that I would do down in Philadelphia. Media Sound was in New York, and they ran out of 7-inch blanks. I said, look, I got to play the company something. And so he said, well, we just have the 12-inch blanks. But he cut them within spec. In other words, it looked like a little 45 on this huge disc. So I said, that looks ridiculous. Can you at least start at the beginning, kind of spread the grooves? And he said, well, the only way we can do that is raise the level. I went, all right, go ahead, I mean, it's only for them to hear what it's going to sound like when it's mastered. I was totally shocked. I mean, dynamically, it just made everything else sound so inferior. I mean, it was just unbelievable, the sound. I made reference copies. We didn't have that many DJs back then. There must have been 8 or 9. Everybody complained, saying, this is so much louder than everybody's. I really don't want it like this. I said, well, turn mine down. But they complained like, oh, you're going to blow my speakers. When Salso Records put out the first commercial 12-inch, 10% by Double Exposure, the other companies laughed. They thought it would never catch on. I mean, my God, that thing really sold, and then everybody else started jumping on the bandwagon.
In 1983, I started a record label, Zang Tum Tum, or ZTT, with the record producer Trevor Horn and his wife, Jill Sinclair. A pioneering expert in the recording studio, Trevor had recently discovered the potential of the 12-inch single format for showing off technique and experimental energy with ABC and Malcolm McLaren. ZTT's unbridled first release was Relax by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, an explosive ode to orgasm, which achieved some notoriety by being banned at Radio 1, leading to it being number 1 in the charts, and which goes places daytime radio 30 years later still prefers not to go. Perhaps I'd better interrupt it there. I went to meet Trevor at his Psalm Studios in London's Notting Hill, where he originally worked on Relax, a song designed to accommodate various lusty forms of extension and enhancement. Trevor, though, didn't initially consider the naughtiness of the song.
I was about 31, 32, I was married. I'd spent most of my life playing in terrible ballrooms, so the idea of going to a club would be an anathema to me. It sounds funny saying it, but I didn't even realise that Relax was a dance record, particularly until I played it to Holly and Paul, and they started dancing. I always saw Relax as more like an English country dance, because it had that sort of Cornish flavour to it. Yank dang, yank dang dang, yank dang, dang dang dang. A little bit like "All Get Ready for the Floral Dance," but with a sort of gothic chords over it. The 12-inch of Relax, the one that sold 2.5 million or something over here, the New York remix, was, from my point of view, a direct result of going to a place called Paradise Garage. I mean, it was obvious what was going to happen, that DJs were going to start really meddling in records. You could tell even then, because the guys that were in the DJ booth, they had samplers, they had synthesizers and sequencers, and they were locking their own music up to records, and then they'd take the record out and their music would keep going.
In a way, you didn't really have the song itself and then made a series of 12-inch mixes of it.
Relax was never a song. It was only really a chorus. It's like a jingle, you know? What's the verse of Relax going to be? You feel yourself feeling a bit tense, you know? Relax. I don't think so. It took me a while to work out how to make what was basically just a hook into like a pop record. What we managed to do was make the bits in between the hooks so interesting.
In a way, you'd got it all perfected through Relax, which was kind of research and development, but still number 1 for a few weeks. It caused a bit of a sensation, but you'd got yourself sorted in terms of making this kind of music by the time you got to the Frankie Goes to Hollywood follow-up, Two Tribes, which became a kind of epic, sort of Spielbergian kind of exploration of the idea of the 12-inch.
Yes.
There were many, many versions of Two Tribes, weren't there?
Until we had a really good 12-inch, I didn't feel like I'd finished the record. And it was only when we did that first 12-inch, the one with the grandmother, anybody in the shelter.
Annihilation,
it's called, yeah. I knew we had it then. I remember playing it to you and saying, we're there, we got it.
If any member of the family should die whilst in the shelter, put them outside, but remember to tag them first for identification purposes.
I knew people would love that, because I loved it, you know.
Our success led to authentic 80s excess, and we released 4 additional 12-inch versions of Two Tribes during the summer, and sundry other formats, which helped keep the song at number 1 for 9 apocalyptic weeks. Those in charge of the charts concluded that we had somehow cheated in producing multiple pieces of product to represent one song, and quickly introduced rules limiting the number of mixes and versions that one single could contain to qualify for the charts, to one 7-inch, a cassette single, a newfangled CD single, and one 12-inch, none of them containing more than 20 minutes of music, which all seemed a bit limiting and unimaginative to us. We made sure each version of Two Tribes was a complete new work with radically different mixes and entertaining new sleeves. But one view was that we were exploiting fans. Paul Williams, now of music industry journal Music Week, was one of those fans at the time.
They probably felt that their collection wasn't complete if they didn't have every single version that was commercially available. So certainly record companies, made a lot of money from some really dedicated fans of an artist. It also started to affect the chart as well, because rather than it becoming a chart that ranked the most popular songs of a particular week, it ended up being a marketing chart of who had the most versions of a particular song and who could sell the most copies. So eventually the industry and the charts company decided they'd introduce very, very strict rules in terms of the number of formats that could count towards the chart. And for a single, and this included the 12-inch single, how long a 12-inch single could become, because a 12-inch might have been sold at the price much cheaper than an album, but actually it could have contained as much music as an album, and therefore fans would buy it and it would rise up the chart. There was often disappointment when people would buy the 12-inch single, expecting that it would be a different version or a longer version, found that actually it was the same version, the same length as the 7-inch, but it cost them a lot more money, and all they got for their money was a bigger bit of plastic and a bigger picture. The great thing about those Frankie mixes were that they were very different. You didn't actually feel that you were buying the same thing. It was a slight twist. It actually felt like a very different single. So I certainly felt like I was getting value for money, and I imagine the hundreds of thousands of other people who did the same would agree.
At ZTT, we felt we were simply experimenting with form and content, and playing around with how much original content could emerge from one apparently fixed song. We didn't feel we were cheating fans, simply creating desirable, celebratory pop souvenirs with increased musical and conceptual capacity. And what we were doing at ZTT reflected the wider, lavish and self-conscious culture of the 1980s. Lucy O'Brien suggests that the 45 RPM pop 12-inch was a sign of the times, when size really did matter.
It was big haircuts, big shoulder pads and really big records too, and the more garish the better. It's funny when I think about it that 12 inches started off as this quite cult underground thing and then ended up with massive picture discs with, Tapao on the cover, or Debbie Harry licking ice cream. And
how do you think it had an impact on the sense we had of those classic 80s groups like Duran Duran and Wham and Frankie Goes to Hollywood? Because there were 12 inches coming out of their ears, really, into our ears, really, wasn't there?
I think it was part of the whole designer pop package that you had these picture discs, you had the coloured vinyl, you had fantastic artwork on the sleeve, and it was all just connected to a pop single that was sort of here today, gone tomorrow. I think the 12-inch was a great symbol, really, of that sort of mass culture, mass adoration of the big corporate stars, people like Prince and Michael Jackson.
Oh, could you organise a small private jet? I'm flying to Las Vegas in the morning.
There was a culture of excess with the 12-inch, and huge gluts of 12-inch records would arrive and then just wouldn't sell. So it was incredibly wasteful, actually, in terms of vinyl. The 12-inch's excess was perfect for the 80s record industry. I mean, they threw money at everything, and when it came to promotion, there seemed to be no barriers, really.
One of the things that was driving me was my love of pop and the fact that I love to collect things.
I wasn't a collector, and I do think it's quite a male thing. And I noticed a lot amongst my male peers going down to black market records and getting the latest white label or the latest import.
What was a white label?
Well, it was a new record, one that hadn't been released yet. In some ways, the more obscure the better. So a DJ might get a great hot record and not want anyone else to play it, but they'd have it on white label so you wouldn't know what it was. It was a badge of your authenticity in a way as a connoisseur of music. And it did seem to roughly divide along gender lines, that there'd be the women buying the big picture discs and the pop singles, and men going for the more train-spottery club singles. The more obscure, the better.
Music that sounds like it belongs on a 12-inch vinyl single continues to exist and thrive, in the way that there is still music that seems to belong on a 7-inch single, and people still produce album-sized collections of songs. But can that continue in a world where recorded music mostly exists free of those 20th century physical formats?
The days of the 12-inch as a mass market format are long over, but I think there will always be a demand for specialists for the 12-inch, and indeed for vinyl in general. That's not going away, and statistics from the industry show that actually vinyl sales are on the rise at the moment. A download doesn't look very good on a shelf, but a 12-inch does. That, I think, will continue to drive a demand, albeit at a fairly low level. Certainly as a record buyer, buying a 12-inch was much more satisfying than a 7-inch, and now looking back beyond that, it was a CD single, CD singles were always the most frustrating, annoying format because they were pretty expensive and you got this tiny little thing. But the 12-inch, this great canvas, and the artwork, because the size was much more dominated, had much more of an impact on you. And then you'd pull out the 12-inch version from the sleeve and you'd put it on the turntable and watch it go round. It was actually quite beautiful, really, in many ways.
The 12-inch single liberated a form of pop energy that didn't exist on the traditional 7-inch single and the serious long-playing album. And it was the exuberant final flourish of the vinyl age, and to an extent of the hedonistic, unfettered pre-AIDS culture, generously bursting into life just before the miniature, somehow meaner compact disc and the MTV video age changed both the look and sound of pop music.
I think the 12-inch was really revolutionary. It was almost like bridged the gap between underground dance music and pop music. It was inevitable that by the early 90s the two became completely fused. It was interesting as well how much it influenced rock music. You always thought that ne'er the twain shall meet, but the 12-inch was the link and the linchpin, and an incredibly popular format for a while.
Many of the great innovations in popular music in the last 30 years emerged because of the 12-inch single. The ways it allowed research and development into how the sound and style of pop music could be stretched, regenerated and constantly, ingeniously mixed up. The 12-inch single helped make sure that pop music just kept coming.
If you'd like to listen to some more unforgettable music documentaries, just subscribe to Don't You Forget About Me in BBC Sounds.